with demand expected to come back, the question remains, does this mean the economy is back on track?
Companies now, after experimenting with offshore in places like India, Philippines, and Poland, want to bring those jobs back.
We invest in the U.S. We're the biggest exporter in the country. In the cycle we're in right now, we're creating jobs.
From Radio America, it's Neil Asbury's Made in America, the show that explores American industry, large and small, and promotes American-made products everywhere. Put Neil Asbury's Made in America to work for you.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neil Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman. Rich, I got to tell you, man, inflation is coming. It's just, is it going to be managed inflation, or is it going to be out of control inflation? And on top of that, you know, it's the employment situation in this country is just completely upside down. I mean, everywhere you look, every website you go, people are trying to hire people. People are hiring people. But yet our government, in their infinite wisdom, are paying people to stay at home. American businesses, small businesses, entrepreneurs, throughout the economy, manufacturing jobs. We've talked so much about manufacturing jobs and how important they are, bringing back our manufacturing. How can we bring back our manufacturing if you can't find people to work? Because our government are paying them to stay home. I mean, it's absolutely insane what's going on right now in our economy. And I don't know where this ends, but I don't know if this is a happy ending or not. But I don't see how it can be a happy ending when you have inflation coming back and it's sort of out of control inflation. We saw it in April, and then we're going to see it again in May. I got to tell you right now, getting things, you know, I have several manufacturing facilities. And hey, look, we have a global supply chain, and everybody's got global supply chains. Even if you're an American manufacturer, you still have to import things. But you can't get things shipped right now. What we typically pay $4,000 for a container of materials and components and so forth out of Asia is now $14,000 to ship a container. And, you know, we just can't pass that along. Or maybe we have to pass that along. But the American consumer is not going to like it, but everybody's doing it. The American consumer is going to take it right between the eyes. I mean, they're going to see costs going up faster than you could spin your head.
Well, I agree. And, you know, this is something we've been talking about for quite a while. I mean, I remember a number of months ago, we have Stephen Moore on the show very often. And Stephen was very, and he continues to be very, and you see him every week on the major business news channels, whether it's Newsmax or it's Fox Business News or Fox and whatever, any of those. And he's been very, very worried. He's raising that inflation flag and saying someone better take a look at this because we're worried where we're going right now. Now, the question I have, and this is going to be great for the guests that we're about to introduce, is that there, you know, Neil, remember a few weeks ago we had somebody come on who was writing for The Hill, and Scott Sumner. And his opinion was, well, we're showing some signs of inflation, but it's short term, and long term, we really don't have to worry about it. And you and I both took a little umbrage to that. We're like, wait a minute, I'm not so sure that's the way we're going to go. So my question is, do we have short-term inflation, or do we have long-term inflation, and is it going to be very painful for us, sort of like, as we're all saying right now, we back in the land of Jimmy Carter? And here's where we go with our guests.
Well, Rich, you did a great job of setting this up.
Just had to say it. Couldn't help it.
To introduce Juan Del Busto. He is the chairman of the board of Del Busto Capital Partners. He's also a former member of the Federal Reserve in Miami. Juan, welcome to Made in America.
My pleasure. Great to be with you. I had to.
What do you think? What do you think about this inflation thing?
I had to keep quiet while you were talking about inflation because inflation is not coming. Inflation is here. And it's here, and I think to stay a lot longer than people realize. I've been looking at numbers for the last month and a half, and I'm worried. My number one immediate concern about the economy is definitely inflation. At the end of April, 12-month moving is at 4.2, more than double what we used to look at the Fed before we started increasing interest rates. The 2% level that we looked at that was working well for 17 years, the Fed last year, in their infinite wisdom, which I disagree with completely, decided to do away with that 2% target and start letting interest rates flow a little bit higher than that to keep the economy rolling. Well, I disagree with that from the Fed perspective, and I disagree tremendously. One of you mentioned Jimmy Carter. It's very hard to rein in inflation if it gets away from us. It's going to take a while to bring that in. And prices are continuing to increase, not only in food, but building materials, cars, because of the chip things, they're going up, increasing at 3 to 5%. So inflation, it's not just fuel, and it's not just food, it's commodities. The commodity index, if you look at the trend line, it's almost straight up at an angle. So inflation is my number one. And the Fed, when they mentioned a year or so ago that they would remain, interest rate would remain this way till 2023, we're going to be in trouble if they don't act. And if this continues by the end of the year, they better start increasing interest rates, or we're going to be in trouble.
So when you say act, does that mean the only thing the lever they have is just interest rates? The interest rates have to go up?
Well, interest rates should go up to curb inflation, and also they need to stop buying a lot of the liquidity they bought. Look, the Fed balance sheet in the first recession in 2008 was very clean. $800 billion in cash and $800 billion on the other side. We took the balance sheet up to about $3.5 trillion, $4 trillion. Okay? That started to be brought down a little bit at the beginning of 2019, start bringing it down to about $3.5 trillion, which is still a problem. From there to now, at the mid-2019 and to right now in 2021, the Fed balance sheet is back up to $7.8 trillion. So they keep buying securities. They're buying everything in sight, and eventually that has to be wound down. So with all this liquidity in the market, inflation is running rampant.
Well, I think I agree with you. I think it's a major concern. I want to read something that was in the Hill about 2 weeks ago, and it comes from Scott. And it says, in contrast, and this is what you're really talking about, expansionary monetary policies can indeed cause high inflation. But, he says, two factors have recently blunted the usual impact of printing more money. As global interest rates have fallen close to zero, the public and private banks have been willing to hold the new money created by quantitative easing programs rather than spending the extra cash as they would do during the 60s and 70s. I don't know if that's relevant or not. I don't even know if that's real, to be honest with you.
Well, two things on this, and I'll bring up the most positive part of the economy right now is GDP. That grew the first quarter at 6.4%. Up until early this morning, the second quarter was growing at 10.1%. This afternoon, by the way, I checked GDP about 3 to 4 times a week. It was at 9.1. Still extremely healthy for our economy, but it has consequences. The economy is expanding because more people are getting out there and coming and spending money. However, this GDP expansion has consequences. With all the fiscal programs we have in place, a lot of this money is not going to be sustained. So 70% of our economy is consumer spending. And they're spending. However, they're spending so much that it's causing an inflationary environment.
Is this spending all got to do with so much stimulus money swashing around the economy right now? Is this all stimulus related?
Well, there's a lot of cash out there.
Yeah, I mean, there's just too much cash to absorb.
Absolutely. Look, if you look back at the third quarter of last year, and I know we're going back a little bit, we're talking about now and the future. But third quarter of last year, with unemployment being at the worst it's been in a tremendous amount of time, disposable income grew a lot faster than it did the same quarter a year earlier when the economy was booming. That tells you that all the money that was given out during the PPP and the CARES Act was out there. And here's another concern that I have, and we can talk about employment whenever you want. I don't want to jump. You guys are conducting the interview.
Hey, Juan, we got to take a quick break, before you start on the next topic. But, they're very, very fascinating. Juan Del Busto, the chairman of the board of Del Busto Capital Partners, also former member of the Miami Federal Reserve. Still a lot more to talk about here with Juan and Dr. Rich. Stay with us.
Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neil Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Ruffin, and we're together with Juan Del Busto, chairman of the board of Del Busto Capital Partners and former member of the Miami Federal Reserve. Hey, Juan, I got to get this out there. My daughter and son-in-law are trying to buy a home, and they happen to be in South Florida, but they could be in many, many cities around the United States and many areas of the United States right now. And even though that interest rates are so low, I mean, there's nothing to buy. I mean, there's no inventory. I mean, there's nothing, zero, zippo. And even if it came available, the prices that you have to pay, and you don't even pay listing prices. It's how much above the listing price are you going to pay? I mean, that's not healthy. That's not good. I don't know. Is that a bubble? I mean, are we setting ourselves up for a big fall here?
Well, in the recession before, there was an enormous amount of supply, and that's what caused the prices to go. But like you said, there's no supply now. And it depends on the area of the country where you're coming to. South Florida is booming. People from New York and California are moving in because of the tax situation. Maybe some other places in the Northeast, there might be more availability. But in South Florida, my cousin just sold her house. She listed it and sold it for $25,000 more than she ever listed it for. And there were 10 people vying and bidding on it. And you hear stories like this throughout South Florida, and not only here. And my sister-in-law just came down from New York, bought in Delray. They had 5 days to close because the person was going to do away with their contract, and it's already like $40,000 more than what they paid for. And these are not necessarily big homes. These are 2-bedroom and 3-bedroom homes. So, yes, the supply side is not catching up to the population, at least in Florida.
Well, you're 100% correct. I mean, I've been looking for another home in Coral Gables, which is almost impossible, because it comes on the market and within 2 weeks it's sold, but within days there's already, there's contracts and backup contracts and backup contracts. People are in number 2 spot are actually willing to pay $100,000 to the number 1 spot and a fee to the agent for that person so they can have the right to, subservient get that contract. But here's what worries me. Here's what really worries me. And this is how we get on this horrible treadmill. If, in fact, and they are, pending home sales have dropped in April 4.4%. We know, as Juan aptly pointed out, that commodities, things that you need to build a house, lumber being, obviously the number one thing that comes to mind, are going to they're doubling, they're tripling in their costs right now. Copper's getting very expensive. That really affects plumbing, electrical, and so forth, which then leads to your HVACs, air conditioning, your heating, and so forth. What I'm worried about, Juan, is that, number one, there'll be no product on the market that you can get. 2, those who want to build are finding out that the budgets that they had to build the home, even if they had the money put aside in the bank, which, they do, it's going to be inadequate to build the home they want. And now we start going down a road, and I'm telling you, it reminds me so much of the Jimmy Carter days. And I have to tell you, my family did land development in Broward, and they bought the land and it became Pembroke Lakes. 2.5 square miles is one of the projects they did. And what happened is Jimmy Carter happened. And by the time it got into the end of the 70s, interest rates were 21%. People couldn't afford it unless you were underwritten by something like GE Capital, which number of the developers were within that 2.5 square miles. You were out of business. There was bankruptcy everywhere. So could we, with this out-of-control environment, with the president that wants to keep spending, and now he's coming out with maybe another $4 trillion, are we heading down a really bad road here?
We are, but I'm hopeful that the Fed controls this sooner than later. But my number one area of concern, not short term, but it's been my concern. Every one of us tracks something differently as an economist. I've always been concerned about the deficits in our country for the past 10 years. Japan had the lost decade of the 90s. Well, they're still lost. Their debt to GDP is at 232. With all the money we've given out, okay, debt to GDP now is at 109%. Okay? That sounds not that bad, but I think it is because it's going to take a few lifetimes for that to recover. However, with all the excess money that we're giving out, by the end of this year, it'll be at 115%. And by the end of next year, at 122%. So every 22 cents out of every dollar in excess, we don't have any money in the account to pay for it. And when interest rates rise and our debt out through the world, we're going to have to pay more on that interest. Those deficits are going to even get higher. So that is a concern that I'm very, very worried about. And back to the unemployment. It's sad that we should have had 1 million jobs in April, and we ended up with 266,000 jobs. And we went from a 6% unemployment rate to a 6.1% unemployment rate.
Hey, Juan, unfortunately, we gotta go, but hey, you've been a great guest. Juan Del Busto, chairman of the board of Del Busto Capital Partners, former member of the Miami Federal Reserve. Juan, thanks for being on the show.
My pleasure.
Coming up, we have Harmeet Dillon, who is the founder of Center for American Liberty, and she is the former vice chair of the Republican Party of California. Lots to talk about. Stay with us.
Made in America.
Sharply higher at the open, stocks continued to perform well over the course of the day Tuesday.
And I think that bodes well here over the next couple of years for having bigger demands coming to this country.
Now, more of Neil Asbury's Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neil Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Ruffin. So, Rich, Juan was all jazzed up today, thinking about inflation and, the type of inflation. Managed inflation, out of control inflation, two very, very different things. And it really, really has massive, massive impacts on our quality of life, the sort of jobs that we're going to have, how we're going to be compensated, just our overall prosperity as a country. Very, very important. Very, very important. But there's a lot of things going on in our country, and it's very painful, to read about some of this stuff. I mean, it's just like I'm just getting bombarded. We're all getting bombarded with just terrible, terrible stories that's going on. A lot with this cancel culture and the woke culture and all of this stuff. I'm just getting completely out of control. Even the liberals are pushing back about it. And even
some of the liberals.
Well, some.
I don't want to put it out there that even the liberal, that sounds mass down there. It's not.
Some people
that
yet. You wouldn't think, are also completely rejecting it. I mean, this is an American thing. I mean, this isn't a Republican or conservative thing. I mean, when voices are silenced and we use our right to free speech, I mean, something as fundamental as that in our country, and you're just worried about, saying the wrong thing and how that can be used against you. And even if it was something that was done 30 years ago. Hey, look, in 200 years from now, they're going to be looking back at this generation, this time in America, and they're going to say, what in the world were they thinking about? And hey, look, you can't look back 200 years and hold people up to certain cultural norms that exist today that was not the same 200 years ago. Same thing will be true 200 years from now. And I think they're going to just look back to this period of time and say, man, these guys were a bunch of nuts, this whole thing of cancel culture and woke culture. But let's talk about that. We got an incredible guest coming on with us right now. You see her all over cable news. She's commenting on all different things. Her work is so fundamentally important to push back, to fight back. And that's Harmeet Dillon. She's the founder of Center for American Liberty, and she's also the RNC committee woman from California, the great state of California. Harmeet, welcome to Made in America.
Happy to be here with you today. Thank you both.
And, the work that you're doing is absolutely phenomenal. It's absolutely phenomenal. And I want to bring up something you're working on right now. It just rips my heart out. James Stake, he's the owner of Your American Flag Store, and he's got people like PayPal. PayPal is there to support everybody. They got a great product. They've become incredibly wealthy, incredibly successful with it, helping to transact these entrepreneurial businesses and helping them to get their money and to make that a very efficient and cost-effective process. And now, they're declaring war on James because he's selling American flags. I mean, what in the world is going on with this?
Well, this particular situation, we're now in talks with PayPal's lawyers to try to, hopefully work this out. And I have to say, in good faith, they, seem to have taken notice of our letter and they've responded promptly. So, briefly, what our client described is that he got a surge of orders on his mom and pop shop, which creates beautiful American flags, decorated, made out of wood, waving flags, outdoor, indoor. And he had been canceled, or some of his flags have been taken down by Facebook, and so he went on to Newsmax to talk about that. And then he got a surge of orders because Americans are patriotic; they love the flag. And in response to that surge of orders, trying to manage that, they spoke to PayPal about a freeze that PayPal had put on their account. And, PayPal ended up freezing almost, half of their funds for a period of 180 days. And anybody who's run a small startup business that depends on physical materials knows that that can be deadly because they can't buy the materials in a rising price of lumber market and then, create this art and then ship it out. It kind of tied their hands. So when they tried to resolve this, they were mocked by the the PayPal employee and, rudely treated. And so we sent this letter because, this whole thing arises out of cancel culture by Facebook and now by PayPal. And I'm cautiously optimistic that we're going to be able to resolve it, thanks to the Center for American Liberty being able to step in and represent this patriotic family business. But what I've seen in my law practice, representing conservative nonprofits and content creators, has been that MasterCard and Stripe and other banking stalwarts in our country have more than once dipped their toe in this water of canceling writers who have accounts on Patreon where people can support them on a monthly fee basis, or people who sell patriotic products being blocked from doing so by these credit card processing companies. And you don't read about it. They don't advertise it. They just quietly do it in response to liberal pressure campaigns by different far-left groups like the Southern Poverty Law Center and others. And so it really requires vigilance by citizens to, first of all, know that this is happening and we're telling people about it, and, create alternative ways of supporting these businesses, and also pushing back on this because there are state laws that may make this conduct illegal.
Let me ask a question on this because, I really hate the idea some omniscient observer can look at what I'm doing for a living, which one would think that creating flags, American flags, it would be a very wonderful thing to do and wouldn't be something that you would debate. And, well, this is a little frightening for us because, you can't have that flag out there. So in a way, you have these unknown folks making a decision about you, your product, your family, whatever, involved in it. And it's almost like you're being nullified by proxy. And you're right. It's happened with James, and thank God he was able to get on Newsmax. And I watched that segment. I watched you. And by the way, I think you're terrific. And I think what you do is incredibly important for this country, for our safe security and the right to exist under the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. But it goes beyond that, even to the large corporations. When you have guns and ammunition, and the left wants to shut down the Second Amendment, well, how do they do that? Well, if we can't do it one way through Congress and so forth and getting votes, well, then we can do it through the business. And we can go ahead and shut down that business because we'll have Bank of America and others. So we're not going to handle this. Chase as well. We're not going to handle this anymore. We're not going to work with people like that. Well, there you go again. You're infringing upon somebody to make a living. And I'm wondering, have we ever seen this before in the last 30, 40, 50 years?
I don't think we've seen it since the dark days prior to the Civil Rights Movement, where businesses refused to do business with citizens on the basis of their race. This is un-American. It is evil. Today, in many states like California, where I live and where PayPal is based, it's illegal to refuse to do business with somebody on the basis of their political beliefs. That's called the UNRU Act. That's a Civil Rights Act. There are also unfair business practices statutes, and there are many other mechanisms that one could use, or even just breach of contract with these companies. But ultimately, without citizens sort of calling it out and pushing back, we are going to be stuck with this. And one of the failures of both Republican and Democrat administrations over the past many cycles has been failure to enforce antitrust regulations or proper oversight over companies who are doing this type of thing. So even if you were to complain about it to a friendly Trump administration, they wouldn't have the staff or, frankly, the political willpower to do anything about it, given the fact that people who staff our political appointee slots are typically people with industry ties and hoping for their future gigs. So there's really no watchdog to watch out for the people. But like I said, to their credit, PayPal took notice and is in a dialogue with us right now. I hope we're able to work this out, and I hope through this example they realize that their customer service people cannot treat people differently on the basis of what they're selling. That's not in their terms of service. It's not right. And we shouldn't stand for it. But Facebook, which started this whole thing, is an even bigger problem. The bank is being responsive, PayPal is being responsive. Facebook has not been responsive to this situation, and they absolutely, on a daily basis, enable discrimination silently through their unnamed, unknown, faceless content moderators. And, to use your term about discrimination by proxy or cancellation by proxy, that's exactly what this government is doing. That's exactly what the Soros-funded entities have been doing for a long time. They cancel writers, professors, journalists, and politicians who express patriotic thoughts.
Hey, we got to take a quick break. We're together with Harmeet Dillon, founder for the Center for American Liberty, and also RNC committeewoman from California. Still a lot more to talk about. Stay with us.
Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neil Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman, and we are together with Harmeet Dillon, founder, Center for American Liberty, and also RNC committeewoman from California. So, Harmeet, in your law practice, and when you do discovery, if you get to discovery, are these rogue employees like what happened at PayPal? Was that just a rogue employee? Or in discovery, have you been able to find that, there is a room somewhere where they're all sitting around saying, how can we take down conservative thought? How can we, penalize patriotic Americans? I just can't believe that there would be people like that in our country. But it's going on so much. And is this a massive coordinated effort?
Well, it is. And the only way that people find out, because these companies do not transparently announce what they're doing, is somebody gets canceled. And then they talk to their friends and they, go on Newsmax, and then we hear about it through this type of informal whisper network. We don't hear it directly, and I actually wouldn't have a problem with these companies coming out at the beginning and saying, hey, you know what, we're going to let certain speech on this platform. It's going to be mainly liberal speech, and, don't bother to talk about flags, vaccines, Donald Trump. Those are the game rules. Those are the ground rules. And, people could then, assuming a competitive market, make choices. I don't have a problem with that. But we don't have a competitive market, and we also don't have any transparency. And the normal rules that would apply to any other business, lying to their customers, lying to regulators, which Facebook, Twitter, Google, and every other social media company has repeatedly done in Congress, there's no accountability for that. And so consumers are really getting, stiffed in this process in a way that is sad, given that we have 535 elected representatives in Congress, and they like to pound their hands on the podiums when they're giving speeches in Congress, and they actually don't do anything about it. So this is a bipartisan problem. Actually, I think you'll see some Democrats complain about it as well. These companies are too powerful. They are more powerful than many governments. Some would say they are more powerful than our government. And that is dangerous because
break them up, break them up, break them up.
Listen, the most powerful thing you can do is control thought.
Can we break these guys up? Can we break it up? I mean, that's what it's going to take.
We
breaking
could
them
if
up.
we had the political will. But look, I mean, and I'm a huge supporter of the former president. But if you have, former lobbyists for big tech as your antitrust people, you're going to get, guess what? No antitrust enforcement against them. When you have companies who have bigger markets in China, which forces these companies, social media companies, to hand over their consumer data to China, all of a sudden, guess what? China is going to be dictating American tech policy. That's what's happening right now.
Wow.
Well, you know what I find interesting really, really quick? I love when they say that the oligarchs, tech oligarchs say, well, we have algorithms, and the algorithms got out of whack. And, of course, that's sort of like an AI Peter Pan syndrome. Don't blame me. Blame the algorithms. And, by the way, I thought the algorithms were established by humans. So obviously, it goes right back to them in the final, analysis. Very, very scary stuff, and it's terrific that Harmeet's out there fighting that fight, because we need more of that.
Harmeet, unfortunately, we're out of time. You've been an incredible guest. We love your work. Keep it up. We hope you come back and join us. Keep us informed on what you're doing. Let us help you as much as we can. Harmeet Dillon, founder, Center for American Liberty, and also RNC committee woman from California. Thanks, Harmeet.
Thank you.
Coming up, Dr. Rothman and I are going to have some final thoughts for the day.
Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neil Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman. Rich, that was a very, very important topic with Harmeet, founder for Center for American Liberty. Very important work. The people that she's representing, incredibly articulate. The way that she explained it, the risk that's associated with this. The only way, you got to break up big tech. You got to break up. They broke up AT&T, Ma Bell, right? And they had to do it. But, they weren't, that was just a monopoly. That wasn't like this cultural they're holding down America, from its cultural heights and the inspiration that we can get from this diversity in our country. They're just crushing it. They're crushing that every day. How un-American is that? It cannot exist. It cannot continue. Even the liberals have to understand how dangerous this is. And some do. And there is movement even on the Democrat side to break up big tech. So hopefully, if there's anything that we can do in a bipartisan way in this country, that is the most important thing that we can do in a bipartisan way for our country, is to break up big tech.
Well, I think the analogy that I would make is that big tech, whether it's going to be Facebook, it's going to be Twitter, it's going to be Instagram, could be PayPal for that matter. What worries me is that these aren't individual companies. They are. I mean, by definition, they're individual companies. But by reality and practice, they work and they conflate their ideas, their thoughts, their feelings, and they become one. They did that with Hunter Biden when before the election in the campaign, last year's campaign.
I mean, that was
vile. They did vile
in a close election. I think what it was like, if you believe the election results, in 3 states it was 20,000 votes or so.
Yeah.
That won the election, the electoral
college. Right, and a lot of people said, had I known that,
that's razor thin.
I may not have voted that way.
That's razor thin.
They didn't know that. But what bothers me...
One thing like that story being reported in a way responsibly that it should have been reported is easily to overcome that sort of a vote deficit. You'd be crazy to think otherwise. But then you take that and then you take about coronavirus and all of this. Isn't it funny? I mean, President Trump took so much heat, but he got the vaccine approved, he got it made, and he got it distributed. That whole infrastructure was set up. And when he was talking about where did this come, was this man made, and did it come out of a lab in China, that was like, you couldn't have that on Facebook. You couldn't, they would take that
you
sort of
talk. You couldn't have it
that
on
was
any
right-wing
media.
That was right-wing lunacy.
Yes, exactly.
And now they're coming back and saying, well, I think this came from China. I think there's a lot of validation to that, and now we're going to chase this thing down, and we're going to just, we're going to check this thing out. But where were they, 6 months ago?
Well, because that wasn't their agenda. Their agenda was not to take care of us, to make sure we don't get sick. Their agenda, as defined by the puppet masters, was to make sure Trump went down. That was the whole point. If anyone believes anything other than that, then there's a bridge in New York you can buy. You can get a great deal. And Kate and Leopold was a great movie. Go watch that. You'll see the bridge. It looks nice. But the point is, unless you speak on that side with one voice and one view, you are not going to get played. And here's the thing. Whether it's going to be Twitter, it's going to be Facebook, or any of those things, they really function like Ma Bell did in the way. They're communication devices. They're communication systems. And as such, they really should be regulated. You have to have the ability to speak.
Ma Bell never regulated speech.
But they didn't regulate. That's exactly my point. They didn't regulate speech. And everyone had the right to get on and use the phone. So where did they say to anybody, I don't like what you're saying, so you cannot have you can't get a dial tone. We're not going to let you talk to your friends, your neighbors, your business partners, because we don't particularly like your politics. You live in an area that we don't particularly care for. You're kind of a bunch of righties, so we're not going to let you do it. These people are functioning the way the early or mid-20th century phone system was functioning, because it was the way to communicate. It was cutting-edge technology in the 40s. But now we have this cutting-edge technology, but these oligarchs are deciding who could do what with whom and when. And that is very, very scary. Very, very scary. And I think you're right. It's got to be broken up. They have to have the ability to let everyone have a chance to have their word, because that's what we're all about.
That's the American way.
That's the American
marketplace of ideas.
Yep.
Hey, Rich, we're out of time. But we're going to be back again next week for another adventure of Made in America, where we never stop fighting for your jobs.